Alrighty, everyone. It's 1 o'clock by my watch, and I think I'm going to kick off. Could you please just give me a thumbs up or something just to let me know that you can hear me okay? That would be much appreciated. Thank you, Eric. Alrighty, so I'd first like to acknowledge that we're here today on Larrakia land and acknowledge the elders past, present, and future. My name's Corey Rusu, and I'm a project officer with NT WorkSafe, and I'm here today with Brian Cleary, who is our senior electrical licensing officer. And today we're going to be talking about the electrical licensing requirements under the Electrical Safety Act 2022, the new electrical safety legislation, which has commenced from the 1st of July this year. So in this session, I'm going to talk about the new licensing framework, the kinds of electrical licenses that are available under the Electrical Safety Act. We're also going to talk about apprentice registrations and trainee permits, which you require in order to undertake training towards an electrical license. Going to talk a bit about mutual recognition and automatic mutual recognition and the differences between these two schemes. We'll talk about applying for an electrical license and what you can do if your application for an electrical license is refused. So first, we'll kick off with a philosophical question, and I won't spend too much time on this, but why do we license electrical work? And the reason for this is simply because electrical work is hazardous. It's risky to practitioners and to people that are consuming services of electrical workers. So there's a wealth of data. You can look at Safe Work Australia's occupational hazards data set, which quite effectively demonstrates that electrical work is quite hazardous, and electricians are exposed to hazardous workplace conditions on a daily basis. Electricity is pretty essential to our modern lives, but it is dangerous and it can hurt you if you do not treat it with respect. Licensing electrical work ensures there is regulatory oversight to protect the safety of consumers, the public, and practitioners by restricting access to the occupation. We can ensure that only people who have appropriate qualifications and expertise can practice electrical work. And this also helps to ensure the quality of service by requiring compliance with relevant standards, particularly AS3000, the wiring rules, as a condition of license and legal requirements. And the licensing scheme also serves as a mechanism for disciplinary action. So if electrical workers act in a way that is contrary to the requirements of the legislation or applicable standards, then disciplinary action can be taken against the license holders. So now we'll get into the good stuff, the new licensing framework under the Electrical Safety Act. So as you will all be aware, the licensing function has transferred from the former Electrical Workers and Contractors Licensing Board to the Electrical Safety Regulator within NT WorkSafe. The former board has been dissolved, and the Electrical Workers and Contractors Act 1978, the previous licensing act, has been repealed. All new electrical licenses will be issued under the Electrical Safety Act, but existing licenses which were issued prior to commencement of the Electrical Safety Act will remain valid until expiry. Upon expiry, all license renewals and all new applications will need to be made under the Electrical Safety Act. And there is also a new Electrical Safety Board, which is yet to be appointed, which, unlike the former board, is not directly involved in licensing, but is involved in disciplinary action against license holders. And the electrical safety regulator herself, Peggy Cheong, will talk a bit more about the Electrical Safety Board in her presentation this Friday. So, under the Electrical Safety Act, there are three kinds of electrical licenses. There are electrical work licenses, which are held by electrical workers. There are electrical contractor licenses, which are held by the employers of electrical workers. These are electrical businesses. And there are in-house electrical licenses, which are similar to an electrical contractor license in that they are held by the employers of electrical workers. But the difference between an electrical contractor license and an in-house electrical license is that an in-house license does not allow the holder to contract for the performance of electrical work to the public or to advertise for electrical services. It's intended for operations like electricity networks or mining operations where the in-house electrical licensee will employ electrical workers to work exclusively on their own assets. And they would not provide services to the public. Under the Act, there are also apprentice registrations and electrical work trainee permits, which are not an electrical license, but they do authorize the holder to perform electrical work under the supervision of a fully licensed electrical worker. And they can be thought of, I suppose, as a kind of provisional license in that respect. So, electrical work licenses. A person must hold an electrical work license to perform or supervise electrical work. And this kind of license can only be held by an individual. So it cannot be held by a body corporate or a partnership. Under the Electrical Safety Regulations 2024, there are two classes of electrical work license. These are unrestricted electrical work licenses, including unrestricted electrical mechanic licenses, which is the equivalent of a grade A electrical mechanic license under the former regime, and an unrestricted electrical mechanic and fitter license, which is a new kind of unrestricted electrical work license that authorizes all kinds of electrical work. This kind of license has been developed to address the needs of industry and particularly mining, who have asked for a license that combines an electrical mechanic and an electrical fitter license. There are also restricted electrical work licenses, which can be endorsed with one or more of several categories, including refrigeration and air conditioning equipment work, domestic appliance and equipment work, electrical fitter work, or electrical line work. And the eligibility for and scope of work authorized for each kind of endorsement for the restricted license is similar to the previous regime. So, unrestricted electrical work licenses. The eligibility criteria for an unrestricted electrical work license you will need to have completed an apprenticeship under the Training and Skills Development Act. You will need to have obtained a Certificate 3 in Electrotechnology Electrician from a registered training organisation. And this is a nationally aligned qualification pathway. And in order to obtain a license, you will need to have obtained 12 months experience as an electrical mechanic during your apprenticeship. And if you're going for an electrical mechanic and fitter license, you will also need 12 months experience as an electrical fitter. Whoops. There are also pathways for overseas qualified electricians. they would need to obtain an offshore technical skills record in the class of electrician from Trades Recognition Australia, which is a kind of assessment that looks at their international qualification and identifies the gaps that they will need to fill in order to obtain a full license. Once you've obtained your offshore technical skills record, you will also need to complete minimum Australian context gap training and obtain 12 months experience under the supervision of a licensed electrical worker. Restricted electrical work licenses are intended for persons who are qualified in a field other than electrical, but who need to perform some electrical work which is incidental to their primary trade. And a restricted electrical work license entitles the holder to perform or supervise only the electrical work to which the licensee is entitled under an endorsement on the license, and it does not allow electrical installation work. So you cannot be an electrician with a restricted electrical work license. This will require an unrestricted electrical work license. So there's only a limited scope of electrical work which will apply to a restricted electrical work license, and this will depend on the kind of endorsement that the license is endorsed as. So I've got here a list of the possible endorsements under the electrical safety regulations, and the eligibility criteria is specific to each kind of endorsement. Typically, the restricted electrical work license pathway requires that you will have completed an apprenticeship in the relevant field. So if you were to apply for a restricted electrical license with an air conditioning and refrigeration endorsement, then you would have to have completed an apprenticeship as an air conditioning and refrigeration mechanic. Or alternatively, if you were to apply for a restricted electrical work license with a plumbing equipment endorsement, you would have to have completed an apprenticeship as a plumber. You would then apply to the electrical safety regulator for an electrical work training permit, which would authorize you to work under the supervision of a licensed electrical worker. Once you've obtained your electrical work training permit, you can enroll in the restricted electrical course or otherwise complete the required units of competency for the restricted license, and the particular units that are required might depend on the particular endorsement that you're applying for. Once you have obtained your your electrical work training permit and completed the restricted electrical course, you can then obtain 12 months experience performing in-scope electrical work under the supervision of a licensed electrical worker. And the supervising electrical worker must hold the kind of license that you intend to apply for. So it must be an equivalent license. And once you have obtained 12 months experience, the applicant can apply to the electrical safety regulator for a restricted electrical work license. Electrical contractor license is the next kind of license under the Act. And this kind of license is required to conduct a business or undertaking that performs electrical work, that advertises or states that the business or undertaking performs electrical work, that contracts for the performance of electrical work, that represents to the public that they are willing to perform electrical work, or employs a worker to perform electrical work. If you operate an electrical business, you will need an electrical contractor license. Unlike an electrical work license, an electrical contractor license can be held by an individual, as a sole trader, by a partnership, or a body corporate, as a company. The responsibilities and the scope of work relevant to a contractor license are the same regardless of the business structure. However, applicants should ensure to apply for a license that is correct for their business structure, as this cannot be changed once the license has been issued. For example, if a license is issued to a sole trader, this cannot be varied to a body corporate, and vice versa. Applicants can apply to the regulator to vary the details of their license. For example, if the company's name changes, but any substantive changes, including where a company's ACN has changed, or where a sole trader wants to change their license to be held by a company, this will require an application for a new license. To be eligible for a contractor license, an applicant must have a nominated person who has held an unrestricted electrical work license for at least 2 years and completed the electrical contractor course. And these are two particular units, UEEL0040 and UEEL0002. They must demonstrate that all electrical work to be performed under the license will be performed by the holder of an electrical work license or a person under the supervision of an electrical work license, e.g. your trainees or apprentices. That is to say, an electrical contractor license does not authorize the holder to perform electrical work themselves. That any electrical work must be performed by the holder of an electrical work license. And the other eligibility criteria is that the contractor must hold at least $5 million worth of public and products liability insurance. And this is for liability arising from personal injury, property damage from electrical work performed under the license. So nominated persons, anybody that already holds a contractor license will be familiar with technical nominees. This is the same thing. A nominated person on a contractor license is responsible for ensuring that all electrical work is performed, that is performed under the contractor license complies with electrical safety laws and the relevant Australian standards. To be a nominated person, you must have held an unrestricted electrical work license for a period of at least 2 years and have completed the contractor course. And larger operations might have more than one nominated person. They might have a nominated person in respect of each site, for example. So a contractor license can have more than one nominated person, but a nominated person can only be a nominated person on one contractor license at a time. And the electrical contractor licensee must notify the electrical safety regulator if the nominated person leaves the business or if they cease to hold an unrestricted electrical work license. And a contractor license will be suspended where there is no nominated person. So this is something to be mindful of. In-house electrical licenses. This is a new category of license under the Electrical Safety Act. As discussed earlier, it's essentially a limited version of a contractor license, and the eligibility requirements are quite similar. An in-house electrical license is held by the employer of electrical workers, not by the electrical workers themselves. The difference between an in-house electrical license and a contractor license, essentially, is that it does not authorize the holder to advertise or to perform electrical work for the public. An in-house electrical licensee can employ electrical workers to perform work exclusively on their own assets. It's intended for circumstances such as electricity network operators who would employ electrical line workers to work on the electricity network infrastructure. For mining operations, which often have their own electricity network infrastructure, and it might be appropriate in some manufacturing contexts as well. Similar to a contractor license, any electrical work that is performed under an in-house electrical work license must be performed by the holder of an electrical work license. To be eligible for an in-house electrical license, similar to a contractor license, you must have a nominated person who has held an unrestricted electrical work license for at least 2 years and who can demonstrate having practical experience for at least 2 years under the license. And an in-house electrical license can only be held by a partnership or a body corporate. It cannot be held by individuals. So apprentice registrations and training permits, these are intended to allow people to undertake training towards an electrical work license, including, the necessary performance of electrical work under the supervision of a licensed electrical worker. A person must apply to the electrical safety regulator for an apprentice registration or an electrical work training permit. And whether an apprentice registration or an electrical work trainee permit is required will depend on the kind of license that an applicant is training towards, the training program required for the license, and also, in some circumstances, whether the applicant has been trained in Australia or overseas. So an apprentice registration is required where electrical work forms a core part of the relevant qualification required for the license. This includes qualifications within the electrotechnology and ESI streams, UEE and UET. So all unrestricted electrical work licenses will require an apprentice registration if you are undertaking training towards that license. And certain kinds of restricted electrical work license, including those listed on the slide, electrical fitters, communication and electronics, instrumentation, air conditioning and refrigeration, they will also be an apprentice registration rather than a trainee permit. And the apprentice registration can be thought of as a kind of provisional electrical work license, which authorizes the holder to perform electrical work under the supervision of a licensed electrical worker. An apprentice cannot lawfully perform supervised electrical work without an apprentice registration approved by the electrical safety regulator. So if your business employs apprentices that are studying towards an electrical qualification, it's important that they obtain an apprentice registration from the regulator. An electrical work trainee permit is similar to an apprentice registration in that it authorizes the holder to undertake training towards an electrical license, but it's required for restricted electrical work licenses that are outside the electrotechnology and ESI streams. An applicant is required to apply to the electrical safety regulator for a trainee permit before enrolling in the restricted electrical course, which is VTP 360, offered at CDU. And applicants to an electrical work trainee permit will generally have completed an apprenticeship and qualification in the field relevant to the kind of restricted license that they would be applying for, e.g. plumbing, fire protection, mechanical engineering, depending on the kind of restricted license. An electrical work training permit is also required for overseas trained applicants to undertake the required gap training for certain kinds of electrical work licenses. Overseas trained electricians are required to apply to the electrical safety regulator for an electrical work training permit in order to enrol in the electrician minimum Australian context gap training. And similarly, overseas trained air conditioning and refrigeration mechanics are required to apply for a trainee permit in order to enrol in the refrigeration gap training. And it is a requirement to obtain an electrical work trainee permit as an overseas trained applicant that the applicant must first obtain an offshore technical skills record, which is issued by Trades Recognition Australia. There are new duties in the electrical safety regulations for persons conducting a business or undertaking, PCBUs, and supervising electrical workers regarding the supervision of apprentices and trainees. I won't go into too much detail, but in short, a PCBU will have a duty to ensure that any electrical work performed by an apprentice is supervised by a licensed electrical worker with appropriate technical knowledge and experience in performing electrical work. And a supervising electrical worker will have a duty to determine the appropriate level of supervision for the various tasks to be performed by the apprentice, having regard to the type of work, the location and general circumstances in which the electrical work will be performed, and the level of experience of the apprentice or trainee. And NT WorkSafe has published a guide for the supervision of electrical apprentices on its website. So I encourage everybody that employs an apprentice or trainee to check out this guideline and also familiarize themselves with the requirements in the electrical safety regulations. So I'm going to talk a bit now about mutual recognition and automatic mutual recognition of electrical licenses. So the mutual recognition framework established under the Commonwealth Mutual Recognition Act 1992 and adopted in the Territory under the Mutual Recognition Northern Territory Act 1922 enables electrical workers licensed in other Australian jurisdictions to obtain a Northern Territory electrical license. Mutual recognition is only available for individual license holders, that is, electrical workers and contractor sole traders, and the interstate license or equivalent must be current at the time that you seek mutual recognition. A key thing with the mutual recognition process is that once a mutual recognition application is lodged and the application fee is paid, the applicant is deemed to be registered and immediately becomes subject to the requirements of the Electrical Safety Act and other relevant laws of the Northern Territory. This is what's known as an interim deemed registration under the Mutual Recognition Act. And an interim deemed registration will continue until the applicant receives written notice of the outcome, and they will obtain a full NT electrical license if their application is successful. Automatic mutual recognition under Part 3A of the Mutual Recognition Act is similar to mutual recognition, but different in that it allows an interstate licensed electrical worker to perform electrical work in the Territory under their home state's electrical work license without applying for an NT license. In order to practice electrical work under AMR, you are required to lodge an AMR notification with the NT WorkSafe. Your interstate license must be current at the time the AMR notification is lodged. and it only allows persons to work within the scope of work authorized under the interstate license. So an interstate restricted license will not allow electrical installation work, for example. Automatic mutual recognition is not, and it is not intended to be, a long-term pathway. And if the person becomes an NT resident, they are required to apply for an NT license, and they can use the mutual recognition pathway for this. So to apply for an electrical license, applications can be lodged in the approved forms published on NT WorkSafe's website, and they can be lodged in person, by email, or via post at any Territory Business Centre. It is important that when you apply for an electrical license, that you apply for the correct kind of license, because otherwise there can be delays in processing the license and you may not be successful in your application, as you might not meet the eligibility criteria. When you apply for a license, you will need to provide a raft of supporting documentation, including proof of identity documents, one primary and one secondary. And NT WorkSafe publishes some guidance on proof of identity documents on its website. If the application is for a new license, you are required under the electrical safety regulations to provide your colour eye test results, and you will be required to provide any training certificates relevant to the kind of license that you are applying for. So, for example, an unrestricted electrical work license. You will need to provide your Cert 3 electrotechnology. If you're applying for a restricted electrical work license, you'll have to provide evidence of successfully completed the restricted electrical course. And if you're applying for an electrical contractor license, your technical nominee will need to provide evidence that they have completed the electrical contractor course. You will also need to provide evidence of practical experience. We would typically accept a statutory declaration completed by an employer or supervisor. And if the license is for a license renewal, you can also use 6 certificates of compliance where the applicant has signed as the tester, completed within the last 18 months. So what happens if your application for an electrical license is refused? When assessing an application for an electrical license, the electrical safety regulator must consider it against the eligibility criteria set out in the Act and regulations. And as discussed earlier, this includes things like whether an applicant holds the appropriate qualifications and has obtained the required amount of experience. If the regulator rejects an application, the applicant must be provided with a written notice stating the grounds for rejection and inviting a response. And to respond, the applicant must provide a written response detailing how they meet the eligibility criteria detailed in the legislation, or otherwise why they should be granted a license. The regulator must consider the applicant's response and provide a decision notice. And a decision notice is a term defined in the Electrical Safety Act as a written notice setting out the matters required for notice of decision under Section 34 of the Northern Territory Civil and Administrative Tribunal Act 2014. If the applicant has received a decision notice rejecting their application for an electrical license, they have course to review to the Northern Territory Civil and Administrative Tribunal, which is available for any decision for which a decision notice is required under the Act. for a refusal of a license application, the applicant themselves must apply to NTCAT. Somebody else can't do it for them. And it is important to note that unless NTCAT orders otherwise, an application for review by NTCAT does not affect the operation or implementation of the decision under review. So if the electrical safety regulator has rejected an application for a license, this rejection will be current until otherwise ordered by NTCAT. And you can make an application for review to NTCAT by following the instructions on their website. There's some helpful guidance at the link in the slide. So finally, I will just point out that NT-WorkSafe has published on its website registers of electrical licenses. There is an electrical work license register, which is intended as a check against unlicensed electrical work. It provides details to the public, including electrical workers' names, their electrical work license numbers and expiry dates, and the type of electrical work license held, and also whether any disciplinary action has been recorded against the license holder or if there are any conditions or restrictions attached to the license. I've got an example on the slide here of what a record in the register looks like. I think I've just chosen the top one. And the electrical work license register is available at the link displayed at the bottom of the slide. So if you have hired an electrical worker to conduct electrical work in your home, then you can check that they are licensed on the register. There is also an electrical contractor license register, which can be viewed by the public and is provided to assist persons to engage a licensed electrical contractor, noting that any contract for electrical work must go through a contractor rather than directly through a worker. The register provides information, including the contractor business name, the contractor license number and contact details, and whether any disciplinary action has been recorded against the license. And again, there's an example of a record on the contractor register on the slide. I've just chosen NT Electrical Group because their office is based right near us. And you can find a licensed electrical contractor at the link provided on the slide. So that brings me to the end of the presentation.